My humble respect to Guru Mahan, Guru Piran Sivasankaran, Guru Piranyo, fellow Jnanis. Um, I'm covering chapter 16, Mahan's, teachings on economics, and you'll see that, very few spiritual books, although it's there in terms of a way of life in many, religious books or spiritual books, but it's not explicitly taken off as how Swamiji speaks about. And I'll talk about how, Swamiji sees this integral part of human life, which is, economics, that is very important for sustainability of human existence, uh, is important, but oftentimes people get so caught up by it that they are unable to they get so caught up by it, and they're so focused on the material wealth that they miss that spiritual element. In that same way, we see that ordinary human beings, it's about survival, and sometimes there's so much focus on it that they forget that within themselves there is something far more powerful, that had they harness on it, you see that their quality of life, the economics, and all takes, you know, um, progresses very well. So in this, that Swamiji knows that many people, when during Swamiji's time, he wanted to teach this meditation to many, many people. And oftentimes, the people that come to him are very, very poor. He used to live, near the fishing village, and most of them are fishermen. And coming from a very humble background, he wanted to get this knowledge to everybody. But most of them, the focus is actually on putting food on the table. Poverty was very high during Swamiji's time. So, in Swamiji's mind, as a social reformer, he wanted to make sure that people's quality of life is really good standard of living that they have. And if they had a good standard of living, then they can take that bread and butter issues off their mind, worries about finance, worries about things, so that they can focus on, self-discovery, self-development, and self-realization. And, we know that when people's mind are troubled by things around them, far less, where you're going to pay your rent and, food, spirituality is the last thing is in one's mind. So in this, Swamiji understood the when he was during his time, that society's pressures and challenges. So one of the focus is how do we improve our economic status. So that's why Swamiji doesn't propitiate this, that you've got to give up all the desires and give up everything to attain the spirituality. He says, no, you have to intertwine everything. Everything becomes a divine journey. So he devotes this chapter for economics after 15 chapters of talking about, the universe, and, about the self, and, the strengths within us, and so on. Now he brings to that, the bread and butter issues, and how do we divinize this. So here, Swamiji talks about what do we mean by, economics. And um, interestingly, I was trained in this area, so I went on to do my studies in this area, and and I continue to research and incorporate some of Swamiji's teachings in all the research and policy work that I do. And we see that for people to live a quality life, for people to look at themselves, through self-discovery and self-realization, financial sustainability, economic sustainability is very important. So how do we do this? How do we empower people to ensure they have very good quality of life? And this, in this chapter, Swamiji speaks about. But what do we mean by economics? And there are so many things, and I looked up at the Oxford Dictionary, and clearly it says that, economics here is essentially a branch of knowledge, a branch of human behavior that talks about production, consumption, and wealth creation, right? And oftentimes we see that this activity, human activity, is very important for oneself, one's community, one's region and country to prosper. So this whole notion of how do we produce things properly, how do we consume, and how do we, acquire wealth, transfer wealth, and so on. But what is really important is that in this brings in to create wealth, one needs to harness, invest time into many, many things. And we're going to talk about that. Right? So here, clearly, it's about a part of human activity that is very important for many reasons. So why economics is important, right? And oftentimes I hear many people, and I've seen many people that say, oh, I'm going to walk the path of spirituality. Material wealth is not important, and they walk away from everything. But I must say that even the most austere people, even the most religious people need to sustain and survive. And sometimes they become dependent on others. But part of spirituality is also about self-empowerment and self-sustenance. And this is what Swamiji propitiates. So why economics is really important? It is important for the survivability of the human race. Human society depends on this important activity of producing things, consuming things, developing things. So we as a species, have been very successful because we are able to develop economic systems that meets our needs, right? But the whole idea is that what do we mean by meeting our needs? And I'll come back to that spiritual dimension of meeting the needs. So I have friends that, suddenly they are studying, they continue their studies. And while we were doing our PhD, some of them went and started practicing, various practices. And then suddenly they say, look, I'm not going to continue my studies because I want to take the spiritual path. Coming from Mahan's tradition, I remember Mahan telling me that, go and study science and mathematics and you'll understand my philosophy. He didn't say don't go and study or just spend time on spirituality, but he was, no, it is very important to acquire this knowledge so that you understand yourself, the world around you, and the self in you so that you can contribute to society. Very different from many teachings. So clearly we see that economics is so important for survivability of the species. As Homo sapiens, no other species have built this this system that have meets the needs of that species. Economics is also important for ensuring the quality of our lives, right? The better economic prosperity you have, the better chance that you can improve your quality of life if you learn to manage those assets. It doesn't mean creating a lot of wealth means that you'll be able to manage the wealth, nor get a better quality of life. So it requires a good sense of knowledge, understanding, and how to use this wealth really very well. So quality of life is important. So this is part of the spiritual journey. Economic systems are also very important for progress and sustainability of societies. If you see that the economic system crashes, we see that people suffer, people lose jobs, and so on. So again, we see that humanity will be impacted by this if we don't manage this really well. So we see that our whole species depends very much on the economic systems that we develop, right? As a matter of fact, every species depends on the economic systems that we have. If we have an economic system that is anchored on spirituality and divinity, we see that we're able to manage the wealth well. But if it's on, purely material and profit maximization, we see that it becomes intensive competition and people start, abusing other people, abusing nature, and we start seeing, environmental issues, climate change, and so on. So the whole notion that Swamiji speaks about in this I Got book is not about economics that is anchored on profit maximization, but it's an economics that is anchored on purpose maximization. The purpose, what is our purpose in our lives? What is the purpose? Once we discover that spiritual purpose, who we are, we see that our understanding of economics, creating wealth becomes very different. So why economics is very important? It is about survivability, quality of life, progress, and sustainability of all of us. Now, I want to come to this spiritual dimension of this economics that we've been talking about. So what we see here is that this is value-based development. And a lot of Mahan speaks about this value-based development. Many masters have spoken about it. What is it? And I covered this in the last satsang. It's about dharma. That means the knowledge that is important to ensure the survivability, sustainability, and progress of us as a species and the societies that we live in. So the whole idea of acquiring that knowledge, and I'll talk about what that knowledge is, and I covered that in the last time, but I'm going to contextualize from a perspective of our own economics, our own financial sustainability, our families, the communities that we live in, and the countries that we live in. So we see that, this knowledge of dharmic knowledge, the knowledge of wisdom knowledge, the knowledge of divinity that anchors us as a species to create wealth, manage our wealth, share our wealth, and ensure that sustainability of, everyone, including the planet, is anchored on creating value from this wealth. A notion that also very beautifully covered is artha. Artha it means wealth. So it talks about the knowledge first, the wealth, which is the second thing I covered last time. Then he talks about desires, aspirations, ambition. That's karma. How do we ensure, our society, we progress, our family progress, our communities progress, and the broader nations progress. So it's that aspirations that all of us have, right? And moksha means having an enlightened life, a life of good quality, not just for ourselves, but also the future generation. So Swamiji anchors this notion of divinity and economics very nicely in this chapter, and it leaves a few key points for us to think about. And I was fortunate enough to read his books at a very early age and slowly started thinking in this way, and started doing a lot of research in this area and work with a lot of policy, And today was really interesting. I had a full set of meetings where the first meeting was with a Orang Asli group that want to look at sustainability of the society. In the afternoon was with the corporate sector, and later part was with the government sector. So we see that all of them are concerned about the same thing, but the context is very different. The only difference is that if you acquire the knowledge, you can help all of them. Right? So here, the whole idea of the economic framework models that Swamiji talks about is anchored on this notion of dharma, artha, karma, and moksha. So the focus on economics is artha. How do we create that wealth? And without the dharmic mind, and without the karma, the aspirations and ambitions, we would not be able to use the wealth effectively or generate, manage, use the wealth appropriately to acquire moksha and enlightened, high quality life. So how have we done as a species? We've gone through different economic systems, right? And, I think I covered this when we covered the evolution chapter on how we as a species has evolved, creating market economies, and so on. But I just want to recap this with you. We as a species were nomadic. We were going to places, grab whatever we can eat, fight tribes, fight, for resources. And we were killing it ourselves. We had to counter animals that are bigger than us. And we did not have the sustainability. When climate is really bad, we don't get food. When things are good, we get abundance of food. So things were, very nomadic, uncertain. But something clicked in the human mind when things got really bad. Somehow nature has built in us to become creative. So what happened was that we started developing, started collaborating, cooperating, sharing things, and we developed a system, a barter economic system, where if I had corn, somebody had milk, my corn I can exchange for milk. So the barter trade. So there was cooperation. So from nomadic, very competition intensive, people are fighting with each other, tribes are killing each other. So they realized, hey, something in us that said, look, we can't do this, right? So let's come together. So people collaborated and cooperated to create this system that we had access to food and various other services. So there was an intellectual enlightenment that shifted us. That process completed further where we had people started specializing in things, started doing more knowledge, experiences, and so on. And we started seeing, highly specialized people like tailors and blacksmiths were providing services. So we see that as stability came in, as calm and, more harmonious system come in, we're able to generate better wealth, create better wealth, manage our wealth system better, and society progress. And that's why we as a species have been very successful, at least to keep ourselves, growing compared to many of the other species. But more importantly, we are not as powerful as many species, yet we have power over them. The mere fact that, we are able to collaborate, cooperate, share knowledge, and so on. We move now from specialization. Knowledge was very important. And particularly in the 18th century with science, technology, innovation, people that invested time in knowledge, in technology, in innovation were starting to lead the way, lead society. So we started seeing, the Fords and others, now we have newer type of technology. So if we want to be successful, knowledge is very important, right? I always tell people, if you want to be spiritually successful, acquire the knowledge of yourself, acquire the knowledge of things around you, acquire the knowledge of, the world around you so that you can create value. So knowledge is very important. Never stop learning, right? And finally, we see that increasingly, yes, there are knowledge that have helped us progress, but some of this also has caused degradation of the environment, pollution, climate change. Ultimately, it impacts us. It creates zoonotic diseases like COVID and others. So there is a push towards people like Mahan and others from those days on have been pushing wisdom economic systems, value-based economic systems, which are more nature-centric, more harmonious. The wealth that we generate using our own effort, in a very righteous way, in a very divine way. And as we do that, as we become more and more nature-centric, understanding nature, we understand our own natural state, and we start seeing that we unlock the creativity in us, the industriousness in us to be able to create wealth for ourselves, manage wealth, share the wealth with not just our family, but the communities that we live in. And ultimately, through this experience, we help build better economic systems, better economic models, so that society can generate all this wealth without harming nature. So a lot of my work now is centered around planetary health. If the planet is not healthy, people are not healthy. If people are not healthy, the economic systems will all crumble, will not be healthy. So you see that in this context, Swamiji actually covers this beautifully, that, wealth is important, but the most important wealth is that this material wealth needs to be anchored on the spiritual wealth. I've seen many people who, my age, maybe older than me, have gone all out to acquire material wealth, has very little time for meditation and other things. Whenever I talk to them, say, "Oh, I got no time. I'm busy with work and all those things." And ultimately, you see that one fine day, all this have to come to an end. There's only so much. And you start asking, I've spent 30, 40, 50 years. What's all this about? While many people spend a lot of time on understanding material wealth, acquiring material wealth, if you don't harness that spiritual wealth, these material wealth is meaningless, right? So, but if we anchor it on a value-based, nature-centric, natural, power within us, we see that our understanding of creating wealth means something very different. It means dharma, artha, kama, and moksha. Dharma means acquiring the wisdom, knowledge to create that 10 capitals that I spoke about that creates value for all of us. Life is not about chasing material wealth. Life is essentially about the values that we generate that gives us harmony. Part of the harmony is actually ensuring that we have a good quality of life, peace, stability, tranquility, creativity, and most important thing is nobility, generating that values that are more and more universal. And that's what true economic systems are, which Swamiji talks about in this chapter. Sandosham, thank you. I'll continue further in the next class on how do we, as individuals, play a key role in creating this sound economic system.